Well, now that we've had a little breath of fresh air, I'm sad to say it was going to be short-lived. Although Jotham was a godly man, he failed, as I said, to motivate his nation to turn to God. And sadly, that ineffectiveness carried over into his own family. For when Jotham died at the age of 41, his son, at 20 years old, a man by the name of Ahaz, rises to the throne. And in many ways, he becomes the absolute worst king that Israel ever had. Not Israel, Judah. The absolute worst king. And the reason for that is because he became the complete opposite of everything his father was. This was a man who was devoted to wickedness. This was a man who engaged in activities that were so heinous that they are still remembered and are repulsive today. We find that unlike David and his father Jotham, 2 Chronicles 28 and verse 1 says that Ahaz did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord. Instead, he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. That's not a description that anybody wanted. The kings of Israel were known for being very wicked men. And so Ahaz, rather than following the example of his father and being a good, righteous person, he was following the example of the kings of Israel. Well, more than likely, one of the reasons he did that was because that's really what the people were wanting. The people were wanting to continue to live in sin, and they wanted someone that would endorse what they were doing. Jotham wouldn't go along with it, but he wasn't strong enough to stop it. So now Ahaz comes in, and by my estimation, he's doing this, try to gain the trust and the praise of the people. He goes along with whatever they want to do, and then he takes it to an even deeper, darker level than they had ever been. We're told that one of the first things that he did was to go in and to make graven images to the Baals. Remember, those had already been driven out of the land. But now one of the first things he does is bring them back. Brings these false gods back. But if you think that's bad, 2 Chronicles 28 and verse 3 tells us that Ahaz burned incense in the valley of the son of Hinnom and even offered his own children as burnt offerings. Look at what that text says. It says that he practiced the abominations of the nations which the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. Basically, all of those heathen nations that had been driven out of the land of Canaan when the Israelites first came in and were driven out because of their idolatrous practices. The text is saying that now Ahaz is doing the very same things that they were doing. They were driven out, they were destroyed because of those very same things. Well, I want you to notice the name of the place where it says that he went and engaged in these rituals. The valley of the son of Hinnom. When we come into the New Testament, in the Greek language, the term that is used to describe hell, the eternal place of torment of the unrighteous, is the Greek term Gehenna, which is derived from this place, Hinnom. And the reason that this word was developed in the Greek language to describe that place is because of the terrible practices that took place in that valley. I mean, you stop and you think about just how depraved a people have to become to sacrifice their own children as burnt offerings to a false god. And then you stop and you think about the description that we're given of what hell is going to be like. A place of continuous burning. This all began during the reign and under the leadership of King Ahaz. It was during this time that Judah started to look and act more and more like Israel, something that they would come to regret, because just as Israel would fall, eventually Judah is going to get to the point that due to their wickedness, they too are going to fall. Well, because of Ahaz's wickedness, because of the idolatrous practices that he was engaging in, we're told that God handed him over to the kings of Syria and Israel. Essentially, Syria and Israel were allowed to come in and conquer anything they wanted to conquer, and Ahaz really had no way to stand up against them, because God had turned his back on Ahaz. Well, they came and they tried to overcome him at Jerusalem. They were unsuccessful in this, but they were successful in going in and conquering Damascus. They took the residents of Damascus back to their homeland and pressed many of them into slavery. And they also went in and they took many of the spoils from those places and carried them back. Now, many of those people from Damascus, as they were being taken back to Syria, they stopped for a time. And we're told that in one day, 120,000 soldiers had been killed in battle. And so these people were afraid for their lives. They knew that the Syrians were not afraid to put them to death. But we find that as Israel was carrying many of them back as slaves. Now remember, these were what we would say today, these were the cousins of the Israelites. They were relatives. But they had conquered many of them through this sinful alliance with Syria. And now they were on the way to take them back and to press them into battle. But along the way, the Lord sent a prophet by the name of Oded, O-D-E-D. And he came to the army of Israel and he brought a warning in 2 Chronicles 28, verses 9 through 11. He says, "Look, because the Lord God of your fathers was angry with Judah, he has delivered them into your hand. But you have killed them in a rage that reaches up to heaven. And now you propose to force the children of Judah and Jerusalem to be your male and female slaves? But are you not also guilty before the Lord your God? Now, hear me therefore, and return the captives whom you have taken captive from your brethren, for the fierce wrath of the Lord is upon you." Essentially, what they were being warned was the fact that they were breaking a command in the law of Moses that they were not to take any of their brethren as captives. This is found in Leviticus 25, 39 through 42, if you want to jot that down and look at it sometime. But we find that when they heard this warning, some of the leaders of the tribe of Ephraim, they really took note of what was said. They took it to heart. They realized that what they were doing was not right. And so they took these captives and they used part of the spoils from the battle to clothe them, to feed them, and to care for them. And after they had done this, they took them back to the city of Damascus and they turned them loose. We see that at least for a very short period of time, a number of the Israelites did heed God's command. And these people of the city of Damascus, they were not carried away as slaves. Well, this was a very low time in that kingdom. The Bible tells us that the kingdom had been brought low. God had allowed that kingdom to get to that point because Ahaz had encouraged the moral decline of that kingdom. He had been continually unfaithful to the Lord, 2 Chronicles 28:19. And during this time, we find, and I find it somewhat interesting and somewhat comical, notice the way that the writer describes Ahaz in this passage. He doesn't describe him as the king of Judah. He describes him as the king of Israel. And most people believe that that was done in derogatory fashion. Essentially, the writer is saying, he was acting more like the kings of Israel, not the kings of Judah, so we might as well just call him a king of Israel. You see, he had lost all respect because of his wickedness. So Ahaz, when he recognizes the precarious situation he's in, he knows that these other kingdoms are coming in. Edom is coming in, trying to conquer some of that property. But also Syria is coming in and trying to do battle. And so rather than turn to God, the only one that could give them the strength to be victorious in battle, Ahaz goes to another of these neighboring kingdoms. He goes to the king of Assyria. Now this is where, in my opinion, and it may not be this way for you, but in my opinion, this is where it gets a little confusing, because we have a kingdom of Syria and we have a kingdom of Assyria. These two kingdoms bordered each other, and they were both located to the north of both Israel and Judah. And both Israel and Judah would have issues with each of these kingdoms. Now there are some who will erroneously group all of these into one heading. They'll say, well, the Syrians and the Assyrians, they were the same people. Well, they really weren't. They were two separate nations. They just had very, very similar names. And so what happened, Ahaz, he goes into the temple. He takes many of the precious items there from the temple. He goes into his own treasury. He goes into his house. And he puts together this wonderful gift package that he's going to take and present to the king of Assyria, hoping to gain him as an ally. But when he goes to the king of Assyria, the king refuses. Now he accepts the gift. He takes all of these valuable items, but then he refuses to come to the aid of Judah. Now most people believe that the reason that he refused was because he saw this as an opportunity to seize upon the weakness of Judah to go in and to conquer some of their land possession. And we know for a while that nothing happened on the part of the Assyrians, but eventually, and this did bring a little bit of relief to Judah, but really not all that much. The Assyrians come in and they do battle with the Syrians. So you have the Syrians and the Assyrians going to war with each other. The Assyrians, they drive all of the Syrians out of Judean property. They drive them out of the city of Damascus and they put to death the Syrian king. But in the grand scheme of things, this really did not benefit Judah any at all, because they still had a hostile force now occupying that land. They had essentially swapped one enemy for another. You no longer had Syria, but now you have Assyria. So Ahaz, he's in a tight spot. He goes, he sees the king of Assyria, tries to get help. King won't give it. But while he's there in Damascus, he sees and he falls in love with this hand-carved altar. This altar that has been made for the worship of false gods. He obtains a copy of the blueprints for this altar. He sends it ahead of him back to Jerusalem. And there they are given to a priest by the name of Urijah. And Urijah, he gets to work and he crafts an altar just like the one that Ahaz had seen in Damascus. He takes this altar. And when Ahaz gets there, Ahaz immediately begins to offer all the different types of commanded offerings that were found under the old law. burnt offerings, grain offerings, drink offerings, and peace offerings, 2 Chronicles 16:13. But the problem lay in the fact that he was not offering these things on the altar of God. He was offering these things on an altar to a false god. Well, let's stop right there. We don't really have time to finish that thought. We're just about finished, though, with Ahaz. So next Wednesday night, we'll finish this up real quick, and then we'll get into our next king.